Welcome back. This is the Caniac Chronicles. I'm your chronicler, Andy, and it's good to have you. Today is Season 1, Episode 12, and if you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, this is Episode 1. I will be ceremoniously naming the YouTube episode Episode 1 this week, but in subsequent episodes, I will be updating that to match, the lifetime episode count of the channel. But whether you're on Spotify, whether you're on YouTube, I do appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here and having a listen to this. So without further ado, let's get into it. Today's agenda is going to be basically a general overview of the first three games of the season so far. We're going to dive into the two crown jewels in terms of, new faces on the bench in Nikolai Ehlers and Keandre Miller. We'll do a check-in on Aho and Jarvis, kind of the two production machines of this team thus far, even though Aho hasn't scored a goal yet. We're going to give a nice little honorary segment to Brandon Bussey on his NHL debut last night in San Jose. He looked phenomenal. Really promising stuff from him. I hope that, yesterday was not necessarily a fluke, but, I hope it wasn't a one-hit wonder. There we go. A little term from the music industry. Yeah, I hope Brandon Bussey's performance last night was not a one-hit wonder. If it wasn't, if that's the real deal, if that's what we can expect from him on a day-to-day basis, I gotta say, this team could be threatening. This team could be very scary, come May, June, July. April, May, June. And then we'll kind of, we'll touch upon just various thoughts that I have throughout the podcast, but that'll be the general agenda for today before we wrap up. So anyways, Canes start the season 3-0. Very exciting to be a fan of the Hurricanes this season. You love seeing it. Honestly, most of the games, the majority of each of the games, if not all of each of the game, or all of some of the games, was fully in control by Carolina, right? New Jersey was kind of giving it their all, the entire first game of the season there. If you watched the game, it was very back and forth for probably the first 50 minutes of the game. And then right there at the end, with about 3 minutes left, Seth Jarvis, scores what ultimately is the game-winning goal. Again, yeah, like I said, with just under 3 minutes to go there. So New Jersey, it was a pretty good competitive game, don't get me wrong, and Markstrom was standing on his head. I mean, he was the guy who was keeping them in it for the whole game. I think they hit 5 posts and crossbars that game. I know they hit 3 or 4, but I want to say it was 5, and it might even be 6. I might have to go back and look through it. But they hit the post a lot. They peppered Markstrom, 33 shots on goal, and that's tough for any NHL goalie to face. That's a lot of work to expect from your goaltender. And Markstrom did it, like I said, Markstrom did a very good job of doing his best to handle that. Their team looked overall pretty competitive, but I think at the end of the day, and you kind of saw it there, obviously at the end after that fourth goal, that basically sealed it for us. And Jarvis does net the empty netter just about 2 minutes later, which really seals the deal. So again, it was a pretty competitive game for the majority of it, but by the end of it, it was more or less a blowout. The Canes kind of finally, the Devils were bending but not breaking that entire game, and then there in the final 5 minutes of the game, the Canes really snapped their back in half, which was good. It was good to go into the end of that game there, knowing that we had the points in hand, knowing that we probably weren't going to need overtime to solve this, and that we would be able to move on. Jarvis, while we're on the topic of him, actually, I'll wait for it because we are going to go into him and Aho kind of in depth here. The next game, another home game against Philly. Philly's in town. Philly got going quick. They scored in the first period with just under 30 seconds left to go. Owen Tippett from Zegras and Konechny. And, to be honest, at that point, it was a power play goal. But at that point, I don't really know where to slot Philly this season. They have a really good coach this year in Rick Tocchet, especially for that organization. I think, he did a really good job in Vancouver, bringing them to back into the playoffs after a decent drought from them. But he couldn't get them over that initial hump of that first round, and they parted ways. But for Philadelphia, I think he's a really good pickup. I think he's a good. He's a coach who I think brings enough from that traditional coaching of hockey, those tougher years like the Quenneville years, the Tortorella years, that type of coach. I think he brings a lot from that era of the game, but I think he's also hip enough, if you will, to bring more of the modern aspect into it too, and relate more to the generation of players that are coming into the league now. The generation who have ultimately had an iPad or a phone in their hand, probably since they were 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and just are a little different from every other generation before them, like it always is. So Tocchet, I think, is there. I think he really could do something for this team. It's going to obviously, they've brought in a number of new pieces as well, especially in, Trevor Zegras. And they have, a really good player in Travis Sanheim, who ended up scoring the game there, tying the game there late in the third, forcing us to go to overtime, which had me worried. I'm not going to lie. But ultimately, fortunately, Philadelphia scores in overtime with just over a minute left, I believe, in the game. But immediately Anderson was, waving it off, saying that he felt, there was some goaltender interference there upon the replay. I think it was a little bit of a gray area, this one, but ultimately, in the grand scheme of goaltender interference, it was actually a pretty cut and dry, yeah, that's going to be a goaltender interference for me. Like Trip Tracy says, I'm never going to take anything for granted. I'm never going to assume one way or the other on goaltender interference, because let's be honest, we've all seen at least 5 to 10 goaltender interference calls either go the way that we didn't expect them to, get reversed when we didn't expect them to, or just leave us completely puzzled for one reason or another. I know everybody here can sort of relate to that, whether you're a Hurricanes fan or even a hockey fan at large. Which actually, while I mention that, if you have Fubo, if you subscribe to Fubo, and this is not an ad, this is just a PSA because I wasn't aware of it. My wife caught it, so shout out to her. But if you have Fubo, check in your promotions section or maybe call a customer representative, because ESPN Unlimited is being included in Fubo this season. So and ESPN Unlimited provides basically essentially everything that ESPN Plus provided. And it is a much better product. I'll be honest. For as much as I like to hate on ESPN and the services that they provide for us to watch live sports, I will say that ESPN Unlimited has been a very good product, a very stable product, and that's what I've liked most about it thus far. But anyways, it's a 1-for-1 trade from ESPN Plus. All NHL teams are playing that are playing on a local broadcast can be viewed through the ESPN Unlimited promo through your Fubo cable subscription. So just again, a quick PSA: if you are interested in watching other teams like myself, definitely look into that and see if that's something that you get to. I don't remember where I was at. So the goaltender interference. Obviously the goal ends up getting overturned, which is very nice. It gives Carolina a break that they've needed. That's a call that really hasn't gone their way over the last 6-7 seasons, I feel. Even ones when they initiate the challenge or initiate the review, it doesn't always, it pretty much never goes their way, to be honest. I'll run the numbers on it later, but I'm pretty confident in that. And lo and behold, Seth Jarvis from Aho and Gostisbehere, that's the third respective stat of each player. So it's Jarvis's third goal, it's Aho's third assist, as well as Gostisbehere's third assist. So a lot of production from the entire team this game. One particular thing to note about the Flyers game is that we had 4 goals. We had 10 different players who achieved either an assist or a goal in the campaign, and there was no multi-point nights that night. So it was a unique goal scorer with unique assists on every goal that night. And, if that's not evidence of a team with a large amount of depth, which I have now spoken about on a number of different episodes, I don't know what is. On top of that statistic, if you need more of an example of depth, let's go through the Sharks game really quick, and then I'll bring it back to that point of depth there. So, Hurricanes play the Sharks last night. It ends 5-1. Very confident win. Obviously, it's the most confident win that we've had this on the season so far. Sean Walker gets the party started from Aho. And this is very early into the second period. It's about 90 seconds in. And one thing I want to mention at this point, before I do forget this, and this is, you can chalk this up to some early Aho talk or early check-in Aho talk, which is that Aho absolutely was the main driver of this play, of this goal. Jarvis gets credited with a secondary assist on the play, which is funny because I don't even really remember Jarvis touching it. And, this is actually a good example. If my brother's listening, here's your exhibit A of why they should remove the secondary assist, my guy. But Jarvis, I think, gets the puck to Aho, and then Aho brings it into the zone, or it was at the point, and so he's just doing stuff to hold the zone instead of dump it, lose possession. But who ends up on Sebastian Aho? Dmitry Orlov, former NHL or former Hurricanes defenseman from just last season. And Orlov is a big, heavy defenseman, and when he gets on you, he is really going to lean his weight into you, lean his weight off of you, drag you back, he's not going to make it easy for you by any means of the word. And he did exactly that to Aho. He was working Aho from one point to the other, and Aho looked impressive. Aho looked very impressive on this play. He looked, I don't want to say it's a 1-for-1 matchup, but he looked very similar to, a certain Kachuk brother who can kind of carry the puck around and with one hand, keep off his opponent, keep them back, keep their weight back, keep their momentum, and just do other things with the puck. And Aho did exactly that. And he found some space, got the puck to Sean Walker, and Sean Walker didn't even really have a full shot on the puck. And he still scores from the point because of all the traffic that was ending up, being created in front of the net while Aho was doing his thing with Orlov. So, that was a really, really exciting play for me to watch. And if you're a newer Canes fan, if you're a casual Canes fan, and maybe you just missed that, or that goal wasn't so memorable to you as it is to me, I highly encourage you to go back and watch it. That was a fantastic sequence of hockey to watch, a fantastic example of a player who doesn't even score the goal, but does over 100% of the work needed on that play for that goal to happen. That's a fantastic example of that. And, if there's any young fans out there that are listening that are, young players, specifically centers, who, are looking for something to add to their game, Take a look at that sequence. Take a look at what Aho did, and ask your trainer, ask your coach how to do that for yourself, because it's some of the most impressive hockey that you can watch. And like I said, it may go under the radar for some people. So if you weren't watching the game, if you were, but that goal just didn't marinate or sear into your brain like it did for me, just highly encourage you to go back and watch that one goal. It was a very impressive play. I can't say enough about it. And then the party just continues. San Jose, unfortunately, and I'll say that specifically for Bussy's sake, does tie it up at 1, and then it's just downhill from that point for San Jose. Carrier pots one just about 10 minutes later in the second period, and then Eric Robinson gets one too right at the end of the second period, about a minute and 20 seconds before it ends. Something special about the Carrier goal that I'd like to mention, it's first of all, it's good to see Carrier score like that. He managed to score because Martinook made a good play in transition as they were, breaking into the offensive zone. Nikishin receives the pass from Martinook, makes some pretty decent moves on his way to the net, gets a really good backhand off on Alex Nedeljkovic, former Canes goalie, and it clips Nedeljkovic in the shoulder, and it just kind of hits off the post and stays out. But because it happened behind the goalie, he didn't immediately cover the puck, and Carrier comes barreling in to just stick that puck firmly into the back of the net as it's right there on the doorstep with the goalie sitting there, falling back to make the cover up. Obviously, Carrier gets the goal, and that's huge because I think he certainly he came from Vegas. He's a former Stanley Cup champion, and I think statistically he's seen a lot more success in the past, and I think he a little bit struggled last year to kind of replicate that for us. But it's good to see him score this early in the season and maybe get that touch back. But anyways, another example of somebody who's not the goal scorer who's making a really big contribution to the play, which is Nikishin. Nikishin has looked great up until this point. He looks very confident out there. He's very intelligent. Knowing when he can lay the hit, knowing when he can pinch the point and try and keep the puck in and sacrifice falling back and covering on D for a potential reward on offense. I can't really pinpoint any moment in the season so far that I've seen him choose to do something and I've kind of felt like, oh man, I don't really know if I like what I'm seeing here with Nikishin. I really, really like what I'm seeing with Nikishin. I think he's fitting in very well with the team. Despite the language barrier, there's still a very big language barrier with him. There's even, from what I've seen from what they've released for their PR this year, Kochetkov even seems like there's still a bit of a language barrier there. And I'm not making any criticism here. It's certainly difficult to learn any language, let alone English. I think English is kind of regarded as one of the more difficult languages to learn in this world, especially for Russian-speaking, people or citizens. But he looks great out there. He does. He looks like a hockey player who's been in the league for a while now. There's still a little bit of his game that needs to transition from how things were done in the KHL to how they're done here in the NHL. But he looks like a very promising player. And it's, in my opinion, it's just a matter of time before he starts finding the back of the net himself. And like I kind of have alluded to in some episodes of the past, maybe make a run for a Norris Trophy here or there. And if you're unfamiliar with the Norris Trophy, it is the Defenseman of the Year award, but it is notoriously only considered for offensive, defensemen who have offensive prowess each year. That's why Slavin has never won it. Because he is a very, very much a defensive defenseman, not so much an offensive one. And then, there's a couple of other goals too. Gostisbehere gets one from Stan Koven, and Blake gets one also from Stan Koven, but he was the secondary assist on that goal. So the team is racking up points. Going back to the depth comment earlier, before I forget that, right before I started the cast tonight, my wife mentions that Ehlers and Svechnikov still don't have either points, or I don't think Svechnikov has any points, and I don't believe Ehlers has any either, but they certainly, neither of them have goals. So you kind of, I think there's a little bit of a concern there in terms of the optics, but a couple of things to consider. Ehlers is still a new player. He clearly, and we'll get into this more in depth, from my perspective, he clearly is a playmaker more than he is a goal scorer or a sharpshooter. And then on top of that, Svechnikov is playing on a lower line. He's getting less time on the ice this year. He has more of a threatening role on the power play. And what I mean by that is, he's on that first power play line with Jarvis and Aho and Ehlers, and it's almost like he's there as like a threat to kind of keep either the goalie or the defense second guessing where he is on the ice, to kind of be a distraction for Aho and Jarvis to make some magic happen. So he's just not producing this season like he has in the past. But I don't believe it's anything to be concerned about. The points will come for these two. We're only 3 games into the season. That's about 2.5% of the season, 3.5% of the season. So I get it's something to worry about. It's definitely not anything to be concerned about at this point in time, especially when you look at who is getting the production. There's already multiple guys on the team who have well over 3 points on the season. You have Jarvis, who has now we're going to get into the Aho and Jarvis stuff, I guess. But you have Jarvis, who becomes the first Canes player in Hurricanes history to start the season with 2 game-winning goals at the beginning of the season. Very exciting there. And he also is he's back for vengeance this season, and I think we saw that. If you haven't watched the face-off thing that HBO did or Amazon Prime, I forget which provider, but some one of those two did a biop on a few different players in the NHL, and Jarvis was one of them, and he lays it on the line. He's very, very candid in this biop, excuse me, about where he is mentally, and he makes it clear the goal has always been to win the Stanley Cup, but I think now more than ever that is really where his mind is. I think he is really ultra focused now on that ultimate goal, and not to say that he wasn't focused on it before, but like I mentioned, I think he's just entered that new level of focus, being ultra focused on it. And I even think Aho is there too. They both seem to me like that's where they're at. Aho, if you haven't been following my Instagram account, I put my money where my mouth is before the start of the season. I've been expecting Aho to have a 100-point season this year, and damn it, I put $100 on it to put my money where my mouth is. So Aho is on track right now for the goal of 100 points on the season. He sits at 4 after 3 games. He is he's about 0.3 of a point ahead of the day 0 pace that he needs to keep, and the current pace that he needs to maintain based on where he is now to the end of the season. He has to score about 1.22 points per game. So he could really use a multi-point night here in the next 2-3 games. But he started out very great. He's on a 3-point streak. Jarvis, I believe, is also on a 3-point streak, and possibly even Blake and Stankoven, and maybe even Hall. I mean, there's so many point streaks that could be going on right now. I probably really should have checked that before I went to record today, and I'm actually kind of kicking myself in the head for not doing that now. But again, just kind of going. We keep returning to this theme. Oops, sorry. This team is just so deep, and I think if it's not obvious now, those folks that we had to walk away from, those guys that had to be sent back down after the season ended, I hope it sort of makes sense now why most of those guys had to return to where they were going to return, because this team is loaded with players, and like I said in the beginning, if they can figure out this goaltending thing too, the sky is the limit. And I'll kind of dovetail that into the Brandon Bussey segment of this episode. Excuse me. Brandon Bussey was a waiver pickup, I believe, from Florida, but he did play in Boston for quite some time. So Brandon Bussey, he is 27 years old. Yesterday was his NHL debut. He had 1 goal against average, obviously. He had a .941 save percentage, which is awesome. Another piece from last night, the Canes allowed 0 shots on goal in the second period, which is pretty amazing. I don't think there's been some periods that have been very close, don't get me wrong. Trust me, I notice them, especially the ones that occur when I'm in the arena. But I do believe that third period last night was the first no shots on goal period that we have had, at least during the Rod Brendamore years. I cannot think of another one since before this one. I'll see if I can fact check that for the next episode, but either way, it's not going to be very many periods like that I can come up with, that's for sure. Certainly less than a handful. So Brandon Bussey, phenomenal job in the net last night. There was probably 2 or 3 different opportunities that San Jose had to really cash in on a couple easy goals, I want to say. And he made some fantastic stops, some phenomenal stops. He's a big goalie. He is 6'4", 200, just under 220 pounds. My brother will be happy to know he's American born. He's from the great state of New York. And he looked very good. He looked very calm. He looked very confident. Like I said, those saves that he made yesterday were absolutely pivotal in keeping the team in the game. It easily could have been San Jose's game after the first half of it, I would say. He really locked it down for them in net when they needed him to. And in the interview, I can't remember who it was. Might have been Jarvis. Might have been Walker, actually. I think they gave Walker the second intermission interview because he scored first in the second period. But they really, Bussey really bailed them out last night. It easily could have been a game that got away from them early that they would have been having to crawl back into. But he looked so solid in net. He moves left to right and right to left extremely well, especially when you consider his size. Goalies in size don't always necessarily make that east and west exchange as gracefully as he did. And he made some really big stops doing that. There was one specific... Oh, Jeff Skinner! That's who... How could I forget for even a second about Jeff Skinner? Jeff Skinner had a fantastic opportunity, a 1-on-0, I believe in the first period last night, and he made a really good move and got slashed, I believe, by Gostisbehere in the same motion. Although the slash wasn't it was a slash. I'll be frank about that. But in terms of disrupting the move that Skinner was making, I don't think it was all that drastic, which means that Which means that, it was ultimately Bussy who did stop that goal from occurring. And there was a couple of other good breakaways too from other members of the team on San Jose. Not necessarily one on O's, but definitely some odd man rushes. And again, Bussy just held strong. In fact, the only goal that did make it through him was a breakaway goal. It was a 2-on-1 against Slavin, and it kind of clipped Bussy's his leg pad, and just kind of trickled through him and just made it in. It didn't just make it in; it had a decent amount of speed still, but he did get a good chunk of it. It was definitely probably at half speed, making its way through his 5-hole, but a fantastic performance. You can't ask for much more in your NHL debut as a goaltender. So big kudos to Bussy there. Really, really excited to see that. Really excited to go to bed with that performance last night from the team at large, as well as Bussy on an individual level. And I'll just keep returning to this notion. If the goaltending can be figured out, in other words, if Brandon Bussy, he came from Western Michigan, which I can't remember if I think he won a national championship with Western Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. But a high prospect for his position coming out of college, and he lands in our lap on being picked up off the waivers after we let Caden Premu go to Toronto. So who knows? Maybe this is what we've needed. Maybe this is the guy. I'd really, really like to hope it is. Again, if last night's performance is what we can expect on a daily basis from Brandon Bussy, I'm excited. I'm extremely excited. And I will buy a Bussy jersey if he turns out to be the real deal, and Aho cashes out on my bet for 100 points as well, because I'll need the money first before I can get the jersey. But it's been a fantastic 3 games. Like I said at the beginning, it's exciting. It's a lot to be happy about. It's obviously a good feel-good time right now for us as Canes fans. But there's still 79 games left in the season. There's still the playoffs after that. And like I've been saying leading up until this point, this performance, where we're at right now in the season, in my opinion, is more or less the expectation. And I think Rod Brendamore would agree with that. And I think even the players would agree with that. For as much difference as there is there with the team as a whole, the roster, I think that the mentality has also shifted drastically for everyone in the room. And actually, I kind of glossed right over them, but we'll get into Ehlers and Miller specifically as well. Miller looks great. Miller looks... I don't want to kind of rip off what everybody has been saying up until this point, but, there's no other way to say it. Miller looks like he has been ready to play for the Hurricanes for his whole NHL career. I don't know how he was being utilized in New York when he was up there. I don't know if that city was getting to him, if the media got to him up there, or whatever it was. But he's found it seems like it's early, but it seems like he's already found a home here in Carolina. He stepped up big and got 2 big goals in the first game. Really exciting to watch that. Really exciting to see him in this system. He almost looks, he looks very Slavin-esque, but he also has an offensive side to him that we don't necessarily see from Slavin. So it's really exciting to have this type of defenseman in our system, this young of this type of a defenseman in this system, because, especially with like Brett Burns and Orlov last year, I felt like their styles sort of or Miller's is sort of reminiscent of theirs, but theirs in their younger years. They're older veterans now, and especially with Burns, I think that was kind of evident in the product that we were watching with him, whereas Miller is, much younger, much more nimble, much more hungry. I want to maybe not much more hungry. I don't want to kind of slight Burns for that, but um, he does look like a guy who's come from a frustrating situation and is ready to right that passage of his career and kind of flip the switch on its head and more or less tell the New York Rangers, you made a big mistake letting me go. You made a big mistake making that trade with Carolina, but thanks for the mistake nonetheless. So, yeah, Miller's a very entertaining piece of the puzzle that's been added. This defensive core has always been widely admired, and Miller only adds to that admiration from my perspective. So it'll be exciting to see where things go for him this season, and if he gets more time on the power play, we'll see what happens there. Right now, I think Gostisbehere is still sort of leading the charge on power play one, and maybe that's just because there's some familiarity there between him and Aho. He runs the point while Aho kind of runs the court, if you will, to borrow a phrase from basketball. But yeah, Miller looks fantastic. He's really worth every penny thus far of what we signed him to and what we had to lose and sacrifice to get him here in Scott Morrow. And then Ehlers, I mentioned it earlier. He doesn't have any points, but he looks very good out there, and what he's doing is very noticeable. Ehlers he was brought in. I think a lot of the reason that he was brought in was because of his stick handling. Like I said, he very much seems like a playmaker orientation mentality, compared to being a sharpshooter. And there's definitely a lot of chemistry between him and Aho already, him and Jarvis. But just in general, too, because his stick handling is so good and his skating, he's opening a lot of space on the ice, and he's absorbing, 1, 2, 3 different players on one sequence of a play that he makes, and he's not losing control of the puck. He's not losing possession of the puck. That's something that Carolina has sort of lacked for quite some time, in my opinion. I think Gensel was brought in as a loaner to try and fill that void, and he certainly did. But we pretty much only had him for the postseason. He was, a trade deadline acquisition, so there was about a 3-week window of playing him in the regular season before he parted ways. And, Ehlers looks like an aspect, a component that we have been missing. And he's certainly elevating Aho and Jarvis being on their line together. So I hope that continues. I hope some points for him and specifically goals come soon because he certainly deserves it. But he is noticeable out there. Even though the stat columns and stat sheets won't necessarily say that or reflect that, rather, he is definitely noticeable from a viewer's perspective. He's opening ice, he's creating opportunities, he's making good passes, he's being smart with the puck. Honestly, I don't really think that he's kind of given possession of the puck up all that much up until this point. And most of all, he has the ability to flip a switch and put a team in a position that they might not necessarily appreciate being in by having to chase him around, around the ice to try and contain him that way. The goals that will come from his play style, they will come, trust me. That's going to bog other teams down. So continued success for both of those guys. Ehlers keeps sticking to the plan. He'll start putting up some points, hopefully some goals. And Miller, honestly, I can't. The only criticism of Miller on an individual level and the team at large is stop taking penalties. I don't have much more to say than that, though, because there's not a whole lot that I can see that I don't like at this point in time. And I've been watching the Hurricanes and not liking a lot of things for a lot of years. But certainly these first 3 games, again, what better of a start can you ask for We're one of 3 teams left who remain undefeated. And, you know, what more can you expect, though, as well? And I don't necessarily think that there is much more. It's going to come, if they can keep this level of performance throughout the season, awesome. The President's Trophy is probably in the bag at that point. But ultimately, like it does every year, it's going to come down to, well, what can you do? Can you continue to perform at this level come postseason? We shall see. Time will tell. At this point, be happy, but be realistic, be centered about it, and be humble about it. Because again, this is the expectation of this team, which means that at this point in time, they are meeting their expectations. And I don't know about you, but the last time I got a meet expectations review at work, I wasn't necessarily going out to Red Lobster to order the surf and turf to celebrate that. So again, with this team, just keep plugging away at it. Keep the mentality that you have. The points will come to the people who they haven't come to yet. And let's just keep hoping for this goaltending situation to play out in the uptick, in the upward trend. And I'll definitely be having my eyes on Bussy as we see how his career begins to unfold. So if you've listened to this point, everyone, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you stopping by to take a listen. I hope you maybe learned something. I hope you have a take that you can bring back to the office or your classroom to kind of share with your colleagues or your classmates, and maybe get an attaboy or a thumbs up for whatever you might have taken from this. But either way, tune in next week, folks. Follow my Instagram account if you want some game time updates. I do a summary update at the end of the game, and I've been tracking Aho's road to 100 points, or cashing out my bet on Instagram as well. But do appreciate it, everyone, whoever is listening, whoever is engaged with the channel and the community. Have a great rest of your day, folks. We will talk next week. Take care.